Talanoa is a word that is derived from the Samoan culture, which means having a conversation. This word can also be broken into two. Tala means story, and Noa means to tie, which brings us to Talanoa. Utopia Washington has created Talanoa as a platform to provide safe spaces for our queer and trans-Pacific Islanders to have a conversation, share their stories, and for community members to make a connection. While Talanoa is usually hosted in person, due to the pandemic, Utopia Washington has been able to utilize digital platforms to bring you Talanoa virtually. We are glad to have you here with us today. Welcome to our Talanoa.
Hafaday, aloha, bula, maloilele, talo falava, to our beautiful panel, our climate justice warriors, and to our wonderful viewers, thank you for tuning in. My name is Everly Moe Falafine, and I use she and her pronouns. I would like to start off with our land acknowledgement. I would like to invite you all into the space to pay respect in honoring the lands we currently pull resources from. These lands were stolen from the indigenous Coast Salish, Duwamish, and Muckleshoot tribes. We honor their stewardship of these lands. We honor their people, both past and present. We also acknowledge the lands in which our panelists are tuning in from. Thank you for sharing your ancestral lands with us. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Amasai Cheke for our Talanoa. Lands in which our panelists are tuning in from.
Bulvinaka, and welcome
Thank you for
to
sharing
this
your ancestral
Talanoa.
lands in which our panelists are tuning in from.
I want to welcome all of you to this wonderful Talanoa session on Our Voice is Power and Climate Equity is Our Resistance. And also, I want to thank the beautiful team of Lolima for putting this together. And also to start off, from wildfires to sea level rise and heat waves, climate change is having a dramatic impact on the environment and people's health and well-being. So I'll go on to introduce myself. My name is Amasai Cheke, and my role is as I'm the regional community organizer for Utopia Washington, and my pronouns are she and her. So I'll give now the chance to our panelists, our amazing panelists, to introduce themselves, their name, the work that they do, and also very important, their pronouns and where they're from. Do we want to go with Jolene, Mama?
Maloilele, my name is Joey Jolene Mataele, and my pronounce is she, her, herself. I'm the executive director and also the co-founder of the Toiletes Association, also a co-founder of the Pacific Sexual Gender Diversity Network. My work is based on human rights and HIV peer educator. Thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here today.
Thank you very much, Julian Matale, and also for gracing us with your presence here today. And now I'll give it over to the next panelist, Ioane.
Talofa, everyone. My name is Ioane Tomanongi, and I'm joining all of you from American Samoa. I'm happily married to my husband, Luatasi Talo. We've been married for 6 years. And during this entire time, we've lived here in American Samoa, being the only gay couple here. I work for the Environmental Protection Agency. My role is the head of special programs, which includes climate change, as well as other initiatives to protect and conserve the environment. Um, and I think that's all. And it's a wonderful opportunity to be with all of you from the regional area, and it's also good to be part of this Talanoa. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we give it on to Langi.
Bola Vinaka, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you all this afternoon from Silver here in Fiji. Excuse me. My name is Lavet Nalangi Seru. I'm currently the Regional Policy Coordinator for the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, which is an umbrella body for civil society organization that works on climate justice across the Pacific. And I'm also part of a youth-led movement. It's actually a network on sustainable development called the Alliance for Future Generations, PG. And I'm also board members of two global networks. So the Global Green Grant Fund, the Next Generation Climate Board, and also for Climate Action Network International, which has over 1,300 organizations that works in climate justice across the globe. Thanks for joining for this opportunity. Thank you.
So I think, folks, now we know where to go when we need the money to do this work. Thank you very much, Lavet Nalangi. Dakota.
Ineni hamzu man yainan mo mi ineni hamzu man yelun mo mi ineni iman mo for night we have ineni man mo for night we have. Oi, hawhwhedai I na anusi Dakota, boko ga hizuguni mogi giza I danu Minnesota makoche, lo sumaskazu giza guahan, giza logwas I tanohu, za giza I danu dolto ops. Greetings, my people who look after each other. My name is Dakota Komatsu. I right now am in the lands of Minnesota Makoche, and I live between Laguas, which is my ancestral home, also known as the Marianas Islands, in Guahan, and the lands of the Duwamish. I'm here with a couple members of my team, and we're doing a residency at Rosie Seamus Dance. I am one of the co-founders of Gimaktangumat, which is a cultural organization which is bringing forward our culture as a way to support creative artists, to do creative practice research, and to surface our indigenous knowledge through our artistic practices. And I sing to you and offer to you the song today because one of the teachings that's been shared with me is that song is a good way to introduce ourselves to each other. It's a way for us to exchange vibration through our breath, and for you to get to know, for people to get to know each other through what is in our hearts. And the song that I sang is greeting you all with love and respect, greeting our ancestors with love and respect, greeting our siblings with love and respect, and greeting all those that came before us. And it was shared with me by one of the other co-founders of Gimatangumet, whose name is Jeremy Cepeda. And it's such an honor to be here. Thank you, Utopia, for hosting this, for inviting me to be a part of it. And thank you to all the powerful panelists. I'm so excited to get a chance to Talanoa, to Inadigan with you all.
And thank you, Dakota, for being here with us. Well, we'll dive into our what we call our icebreaker question. It's more to do, in terms of how we recycle and use waste materials in terms to reduce waste reduction. So the icebreaker question is: you can create an artistic object, figure, whatever, decorative or functional out of a single use of plastic bottle. Regardless of size and shape, you can, encourage yourself to be very creative and, creating this object using scissors, paper clips, and also tapes, the glue, staplers, different kind of materials you can use to be very artistic. And, to do this great. So as we know that single-use plastic bottle is contributing emitters to the greenhouse gases called that, and which returns which exacerbates climate change. And also, you'll all be given at least 1 minute to show your creative work and 2 minutes to share and explain what does this mean to you in terms of how are we very creative in terms of being materialistic with the single use of plastic bottles. What are some art activities should we do, in terms of this work around reuse and recycle?
Okay. I can start, Amathai, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, as you can see, everybody, that this bottle of water, oh, sorry. Sorry, everyone. This bottle of water is now empty, and it's been aired out, dried, and it's full of oil now that I can take with me to Los Angeles for the ILGA World Conference. Now, this oil was actually made by myself for my body scrub, and which I will share with you a bottle, Amasai, when you get to LA. And I have used the label to hang my earrings, and also the whole bottle to actually hold my rosary. And on the label again, I use that to hold the flowers that I'm actually wearing. So in other words, I don't throw away anything. I reuse them, and it becomes a part of me. And it's something that we should all remember, that anything that you throw out will be used against you if you don't think twice. I love you all.
Thank you, Julian. That's we are really looking forward to see the creative work here in the coming week at ILGA, and make sure you bring that. If no, we'll hold you accountable. Okay. Thank you. So, Iwane looks like a very artistic person. So, I really wanna see your artwork.
Well, well, what I usually do here, because I'm here at the office now, is we buy bottles of water, and then after we use the bottle of water, we refill them, and sometimes we create this. So basically, what we do is fill this with dirt. So I plant a lot, so I use these as pots. And the great thing about it is that you can hang it. So you just put some holes here, and then you hang it up, and it's a great way to plant flowers and whatnot. So I'm using this at home to plant my aloe, and also some flowers, and also the hair of Pele. I know you know this plant. You don't really need dirt, but you just hang it on it, and then drape it from the tree or the side of the house. So that's what I do
Thank you, Juan.
with these bottles.
So very talented individuals. There's a lot of linking of work. Reusing bottles to plants, and Jolene reusing bottles to put creative stuff on them. So, and now to Langi, Lavetana Langi.
Thank you, Amasai, and I must really apologize. Wasn't I haven't prepared simply because I'm not at home at the moment. I'm in Suva, and here for work purposes. But I do have water bottles at home. In fact, they're recycled. So I take them to a recycling center, which is a service station. They have a what do you call this? A big open, what do you call this? Bins where you can drop off um, the bottles. But in the past, I've used bottles for planting, and I think I've used it to plant coriander, especially, and I found it very useful. Uh, and I remembered there were times where I just had to. It was very portable, so I just had to like take the whole half, sort of a half the bottle, and then give it to neighbors because it was more than what I would normally consume at home, and so and you could pick it fresh and then just cook it rather than getting it from the market. So that's probably um, my sharing. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to prepare something for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Langi, for that. And also, well, Dakota, what do you have for us?
Well, I couldn't find any plastic bottles because we haven't used any on this trip, but I found some plastic bags that we got. And what I've done is I've used the technique that we use to make tali, to make rope out of pagu, which is a hibiscus fiber. And so I twisted them, and then I twisted them on my leg like this. And I was thinking about this teaching that was shared with me once about how, plastic and gas, because plastic is made through oil extraction. Oil is sacred because it's the earth, right? And even though the extraction process is dangerous and it's polluting and it's it's hurting everybody, it's hurting all of life. I was thinking about the two, because when you make tali, you are twisting two pieces together. So I was thinking about the coming together of our ancestral knowledge, our ancestral knowing, and the materials that we have now that are made from extraction, and how maybe if we twist these two things together, we can find new ways to make them that won't cause more suffering and pain. And so it was kind of an interesting meditation. I don't know if this is a very functional tali because I'm not very good yet. I still have a lot to learn, and I don't know. It seems quite strong, but I was thinking, is it dangerous to use plastic, or is it dangerous that we, like you said, I think it was what Jolene said about, it's what you do with it that matters, right? If you throw this away, it will damage the earth. But yeah, just thinking about how there's plastic in all of our bodies and all over the ocean, and trying to figure out if there's ways to use our ancestral knowledge to come up with a better solution than what humans are doing right now.
Well, I guess Dakota, if you don't know what to do with it, I think you can send it to us. We can make these girls, or put it around their waist and do some hula and siva, and
Okay.
it'll be okay for us.
Let's
Yes.
make regalia out of it, right?
Yes, and so really, thank you so much for sharing your lovely, very artistic ideas. And I think folks that are tuning in can also, kind of find ways, to, use empty plastic bottles, plastic bags, and, be very artistic. And also, like Iwane and Lavet Nalangi said, you can always plant using these plastic bottles, and do it right at the comforts of your own home. Plant your own vegetables, fresh coriander leaves, and maybe some ballet and taro leaves. Why not? And
And I'm sorry, but unlike Langi in Fiji, American Samoa, we don't have any recycling for plastics.
Wow.
So we do our best to reuse the plastics that we have before they end up at the landfill.
Thank you. And also want to say Happy World Earth Day to all of you.
Happy Earth Day.
Yes.
Happy
And
Earth
everyone
And
Day.
joining, Happy Earth Day.
yes,
Happy
happy Earth
Earth
Day.
Day. Happy Earth Day every day. Every day Earth Day.
Yes. And so tomorrow,
Amen,
yeah.
Dakota.
So tomorrow we're having some activities. I'll share that update with you all. But really, let's dive into Talanoa and let's unpack, this wonderful conversation that we're about to have. Climate change is a threat to everyone, especially those who are socially and, economically challenged. So, in your line of work, what is climate change and how does it affect social justice, in terms of the way that we work every day? How do we, navigate system and process in terms of the works that we do? It's the Tylenol, so, let's go around and open up this conversation.
Well, I just want to say that, if you've never been to American Samoa, and I'm sure it's the same with every island, we basically reside in the coastal area. A lot of us live in the coastal area. A lot of our villages are in the coastal areas, and it's because we depend on the ocean as well for sustainability and for food and for everything. And so any change in the climate can, affect the weather. And as you know, maybe what last year Fiji got hit by so many tropical storms and hurricanes, and all of this is because of climate change. It does affect and it does um, threaten our homes and displace a lot of our people. So that's what I think.
Thank you. Um, Dakota, what's your take on, in terms of, the different challenges that our community face, in terms of the way we work and the way we do things in terms of, addressing, the biggest problem.
Yeah. When I think about the climate crisis, I think about I actually think about it starting way earlier than what we're talking about now. I think about the change of our climates as indigenous peoples from places that were centered in our sovereignty and centered in our people's ways of doing things. And then when colonization came, it brought another way of relating to the earth, another way of relating to the natural world, which disconnected or attempted to disconnect us and everyone else from understanding that we are the earth and that anything that we do to each other, anything we do to the earth, is gonna hurt ourselves. And when I think about what that means for my people from Lugwas, it's meant a lot of exploitation at the hands of the United States military, which we know is the number one contributor to the climate crisis. Through the production of weapons and the weapons industry, and as well as the movement of oil and other types of extractive economies. So, and when I think about the way that militarization has impacted our people, I think about how the U.S. military has stolen our land, has kicked our families off of our land, and made it and is making it increasingly impossible for us to live in our homelands. And when we think about the U.S. military, especially for those of us who are living or connected to what they call the United States, it's important for us to also think about the relationship between the U.S. military and the police here on the continent, and to know that the U.S. military surplus is being sent to police departments here on the continent, and that policing is negatively impacting us as Pacifica people and also particularly Black folks. And I think about how the silence that we hear from people around the world around the climate crisis is connected to the way that anti-Black racism makes it harder for people to listen to melanated peoples when we say enough is enough. When we say that's not the way that we do things here. That's not the way that we're supposed to do things as people. We're supposed to take care of each other. And it just so happens that those of us who are poor in the United States and poor across the world are most negatively impacted by the climate crisis because of a couple of reasons. One is that we're most likely to live in communities that are suffering from environmental pollution. And when I think about what that means in Guahan, I think about all the cancers that my people have been diagnosed with, my family members that have died because of environmental pollution. I think about the radiation and the nuclear tests that were detonated in the Marshall Islands. And yeah, I was like, we can talk forever about who's impacted. There's so much. There's so many negative impacts from this way of living that just fundamentally doesn't respect all life.
Yes, thank you, Dakota. And I think you raised very critical issues, like also in terms of policing, policing of our bodies, policing of our land. And this goes, I would like to share, like, also yesterday I was watching a video in Hawaii, a group of women were protecting native burial grounds, from white folks who are wanting to probably build a hotel over these burial grounds. And to me, it's really sad, because we as indigenous people, we're so connected, to the land that provides and houses us, and also mana, that we are to the land. And yes, thank you very much, Dakota. And Mama Jolene, uh, and Tonga, with your current with the volcano, and and with what's happening, it'll be really nice to hear about what are the challenges that that you're all going through, socially, but also economically, in terms of of because of climate change.
Well, there's, I mean, I can relate to both our colleagues that first went through, that first spoke. It includes a loss of homes because of with the volcano explosion, and also now COVID, and all that. It's loss of jobs and personal property, and of course the rising of healthcare, because we're very fortunate in Tonga that the Ministry of Health still do not charge for any kind of treatment unless it's something major. Then we'll have to get people from overseas, doctors and specialists and that from overseas, to come and assist, and that is actually covered by the government. But anything to do with treatments and all that the government, that the hospital do not have, then the families has to get it from the clinics, and they have to pay quite a lot for the medicine. Okay. And the rising of healthcare costs is really, really bad. It's getting worse. And the increase of violent conflicts among, between families, that, that when it comes to moving from evacuation centers and all that, the abuse, sexual abuse and all that happens in evacuation centers, that has actually happened. Okay. And of course, and the foregone income that accompany climate change induce disasters and instability. But climate change exacerbates existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. But then especially in Tonga, Tonga is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change from extreme weather events, such as tropical cyclones, increase of sea level. And we see that happening so badly now. An increase in temperature also, and precipitation, which increases the risk of drought, flood, and coral bleaching. Okay? Yeah. So even though we are from the Pacific and we are so big in water, capacity, of seawater, but our water, in Tonga and even in the Pacific is getting ruined, from from all the from global climate change and all that.
Thank you, Julian. So, Langi, what does this look like for the work in Fiji? In terms of progressive work that's done to address this issue, and also, the work that you do, with young people, for young people, and you know, and more of that.
Thank you, Amasai, and I certainly agree with the other my brothers and sisters on the panel this afternoon. I think for me, I'll take us back to what Dakota had talked about. Excuse me, referring to indigenous people, because for most of Pacific Islands, we've been here for centuries, migrating across this big, vast blue Pacific, settling down, and so we've become connected. In fact, we see ourselves more of an extension of the land and the ocean itself.
Mhm.
And in our own culture, especially the Tauke culture, when a child is born, I think for the first 4 nights in Fiji, they're carried around by their mothers and grandmothers, and and then they later bury the umbilical cord and the placenta of the child with a tree, and this is how we root ourselves on land on nature. And when we talk about the climate crisis, it is um, threatening everything about the way of life of indigenous people. It's threatening not only our livelihoods, it's not only threatening our well-being. So if you talk, even uh, in this day and age, we talk about well-being and mental health, that's under threat as well.
Mhm.
And also our economies and our security of Pacific Island countries. So we've been experiencing tropical cyclones to category 5. We've been seeing massive um, ocean acidification, coral die-off, migration of fish stocks away from
Mhm.
our waters. So it worries people. It worries people who rely on these resources to sustain their family, to sustain their communities, um, to to progress in the name of development.
Mhm.
And the 20 in in 2018, the Pacific Island leaders came out strongly to say that this was the single biggest threat, security threat, to the Pacific Island countries.
Mhm.
But of course, it's not of our own doing. We contribute, a tiny drop to the bucket. In fact, the whole 22 Pacific Island countries and territories contributed around 0.003% of global carbon emission. But we are at the front lines of the climate crisis, disproportionately being impacted, and more so, the most vulnerable in our communities are women and girls, people with
Mhm.
disabilities, people of diverse sexual orientation and gender identities, expressions, uh, youth, children. We've, we are hearing increasing cases of young people who are traumatized from every single climate induced event, disasters. There, when it rains, there's an island coral. When it rains, even the kids are frightened to go out after
Mhm.
what they experienced back in terms of tropical windstorms. Um, so the climate crisis has exacerbated most of these and also deepened the inequalities, the injustices, and the inequities in our society. And it's a symptom of colonial, neoliberal
Mhm.
uh, policies, and also beliefs and basically status quo that we are moving into, it continues to promote
Mhm.
profit for people and planet. Um, and as a result, we have mothers who are unable to access affordable and life-saving healthcare services. We have transgender people who are unable to access evacuation centers for fear of safety and protection after every cyclone. We also hear of them not being able to access aid and humanitarian, some of the humanitarian aid and services because they're stigmatized, etc., and so forth. But then we look also at the current generation, the kind of intergenerational impact that will have on debt that our countries are getting into because every disaster we need to recover, we need to rehabilitate, and
Mhm.
that and governments in the Pacific are borrowing, and who's going to meet the debt? Basically, future generations. But there's a concern for young workers as well when we look at concerns around social security. For instance, in Fiji, because the government is unable to cater for the needs after every disaster, it allows people to not easily, but to access some of their social pension funds. Use those funds to recover from, disasters, rebuild their homes, get their farms up and running, etc. And the concern there is by the time that these young people actually retire, that they don't have anything to fall back on because they've been
Mhm.
using their pension funds all throughout their life. Um, but then the most impacted here is, of course, I would say, I would argue both ways that they're most impacted in the sense that they have little to contribute. And these are indigenous communities and indigenous people, but they are impacted. They've been
Right.
impacted because of, migration of fish stocks, um, prolonged periods of drought, water shortages, seawater intrusion into arable lands, etc. And even we've seen some of the cultural land and that which they hold the going underwater. So, um, but despite the fact that they do not have the kind of resources at a scale to adapt to the climate crisis, we can learn a lot from indigenous people. They
Mhm.
hold the solution to the climate crisis. Look at the way they organize themselves. Keep hearing that in the olden days when they go out fishing, excuse me, when they go out fishing, that they only fish and bring back what is needed for that particular day or for that particular event. They don't fish more than what's needed. But if you look at the, the fishing industry in Pacific today, we have vessels from China and Asia and other parts of the world that's picking up all our tuna stuff, and it's taking literally everything from the water, small and big. And so we literally, we have, we believe that indigenous people have a lot to offer in terms of solutions, and the world must come away from this, you know, very global north, white centric solution and look towards to indigenous people to some of the solutions that can get us out from the climate crisis. Thank you.
And can I just add on to that, Amasai, while we're on the social justice, you
Yeah.
know, one thing that people need to know that social justice is not a different issue from climate change because climate change is a social justice issue. And we all need to understand this intersectionality, the overlap between the social impacts of environmental science of climate change,
Yeah.
because we need to make we need to make there needs to be how do you say it? Make a real difference between considering how to make the action to take action to improve the current climate crisis through multiple lenses. Especially in the Pacific, there's so much blame for our umu on our little umu on once a week, not counting not to mention all the factories in all the big countries that's affecting us. And they're trying to blame us burning little trash of leaves and doing an umu once a week, and they need to know that we're not really the cause. The big people out there with the money and everything who are trying to make use of their leftover funds to give us to try and sort things in the Pacific. And yet the real problem comes from the people who create, okay? Who actually creates these plastic bottles.
I just want to add to what Joy was saying. As Pacific Islanders, we contribute historically low greenhouse gas emission. Like Joy was saying, we just burn for the umu, and that's pretty much it. But the big countries with the factories and everything, they contribute a lot to the greenhouse gases that's being emitted and being released into the environment. And you know what's sad? We as Pacific Islanders are experiencing the significant effect of climate change, like I said, as of now, like growing up, it has never been this hot before. But right now, when you go out in the sun, oh my gosh, it's so hot. And you have to run for shade. But way back about 20 years ago, it was always cool outside. Another thing I wanted to mention is American Samoa is very mountainous, and we depend on our aquifers, our freshwater aquifers for our water supply. So sadly, one of our islands, the aquifer has been infiltrated with seawater, and that's due to the rise of sea level. And so this aquifer can no longer be used. So right now, this village, which is a village of the sacred islands of Manua, Olosenga, no longer has a supply of water from the aquifer that they have. They have to depend on the neighboring island for their water supply. So those are some of the things that we're experiencing here.
Thank you all of you for sharing all of your, the amazing work that you all do in terms of addressing this issue. Mama Jolene, you raised an important issue around, the importance of intersectionality, that these two are not disconnected. Social justice is also part of climate justice, but we need to be more, assertive in terms of how we be more, how do we do more action in terms of the way that we work. And Lange, you raise, very important issues, that the vulnerable communities who continue to be at the forefront of climate justice, and also climate change are women and children, the LGBTQI community, people with disability, and and also how humanitarian aid should look like pre, during, and post disaster. And I guess it's also about ensuring that people and community should be at the center of how we do work on social and climate and also ecological justice. We always have to think about, and like you raised this, we always have to think about those of us that live on land, but also think about lives below water, that we are both part of it. So we'll go into a little break. We'll take a little bit break of entertainment, and we'll get back into this conversation. And before we go to that break, start thinking about climate equity and how does that look like within how we organize in the Pacific and also here at the diaspora. Welcome back to our Talanoa. And so, for those of you who are just tuning in, so our Talanoa today is, it's about our voices and the use of our voice, and it's also about climate equity is our renaissance. And we've had such an amazing conversation about social justice and how that's linked to the work around climate justice and how they're very intersectional and interlinkage. And now we're moving our conversation more of, what does climate change mean, and does it mean the same for climate equity, or what is the most what's the significant thing, or what's the most significant difference about climate change and climate equity? It's the same for when we have a conversation around gender equality and gender equity. So we can't have the equality. I mean, we can't have equity without having the equality, or equality without equity. So what? So what? So how does that look in terms of climate change for us? Langi, do you want to kick us off with this amazing topic of equity within the climate conversation?
Thank you. I guess for equity, it's not really something that's often discussed, that's often talked about within the formal climate climate policy forums. We continue to see there's a disconnect of what's being talked, what's being discussed, which is often relating to limiting carbon emissions, rapid phase out of fossil fuel, but the world is not doing great on that front. There's talk about increasing adaptation finance, mitigation finance, etc. But what we've observed and what what's clear is that when we talk about equity, we are talking about ensuring equal opportunities, equal footing for all groups, for all communities that are being impacted by the climate crisis. And even if we look, if anyone has followed the formal UNFCCC negotiations, we still see the power dynamics between the global south and the global north. The global north seems to drive most of the conversation, still lags behind in terms of climate commitments and ambition. The global south are really pulling up their weight, despite the fact they don't really contribute a lot to these crises, and that's an equity problem.
Yeah.
At that kind of multilateral intergovernmental space. Now, if you look at some of the national processes, when it comes to developing climate policies, excuse me, developing of climate programs and initiatives, uh, setting up or formulating legislations, there are voices that are not often heard in these spaces, that are not included. For instance, people with disabilities, even in the UNFCCC processes, we have 9 observer constituencies, and there's nothing on disability, and even so people with disabilities are not represented at that sort of global level. And then we youth, sometimes rural women and girls, sex workers, LGBTQI individuals and groups are not often included in this conversation, so that you get that diverse um, um, opinions and thoughts and inputs to ensure that whatever policy, whatever program that's being developed is inclusive, and will respond to the differential needs, the challenges that these particular groups experience. That's I guess continues to be an issue, and at the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, we've been working with our partners to ensure that these voices are really part of those national and subnational processes, that they are not left behind, that we are not, intentionally turning a blind eye to some of these groups, because they also experience climate change, but and often in um, um, disproportionate levels, multiple levels as well, and often do not have the capacity and the resources to adapt, or to the kind of climate crisis impacts that they experiencing. So that is like I said earlier, that is an equity issue that still very much status quo, and that we
Yeah.
need to change, and we need to pull that out, and then plant in a approach that's equitable, that's inclusive, that's intersectional, that's intergenerational, um, um, and also that respects and promotes indigenous knowledge and wisdom.
Thank you, Langi. And I guess we should just live with that and leave. But really, like such an amazing conversation that we have here on equity, because it's really about of giving and also allowing space to have equal people to equally participate. And sometimes, like you said, at within the intergovernmental space, the UNFCCC does not even consider having people with disability to be part of the conversation, nor that sometimes we question participation of young people at that level, whether are we there as part of a tokenistic approach, or are we really there engaging in terms of addressing the climate issue. And I think it's also about having to do with visibility. How do we as well provide visibility for groups who have always been left out? And also, how do we hold each other's hand and bring people to be part of the work? And how do we leverage that? And, Iwane, what do you think about equity in American, the work that you do on climate change? And how do we do that?
Well, Langi had already touched on a lot of the issues that exist. Making sure that we include all populations in whatever discussion that is there. But one thing that's very important also is policy development, and policy development needs to include the voices of, and also they need to be, what's the word? They cannot just make a policy without hearing from the different populations, especially the people that are affected with climate change. So I know, Langi, SPREP, right? SPREP in
Yeah.
the Pacific. So I work a lot with SPREP, and there's trainings and also meetings in the regional area where there's a lot of discussions on policies and how to be inclusive and how to make everyone important, every group, every population important, and protecting everyone, not just one group, but making sure that the policies are equally distributed with every population and community. And that's very important, because at the end of the day, it's going to affect all of us, not just one group or one person or whatever.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for highlighting, it's really for everyone. And for everyone meaning everybody, human beings who
Yes.
are, who are part of the way that we navigate on this earth. So it's about everyone, and it also has to do, equity means everyone and for all, not just for some. And it has to do with human rights as well. Human rights for all, and
Yes.
not just for some people. And Dakota, your amazing work. What does community look like for Indigenous people, and in that area about equity and climate?
I mean, I think I see inequity as the root cause of climate change, right? Inequity is about systems of power that were created that say that somebody's lives are more valuable than another's. And fundamentally, that kind of thinking is not in alignment with indigenous ways of being. That kind of thinking is what causes humans to believe that it's okay to hurt somebody else, and it's not. And that's the really simple truth of it. What happens when you build systems of power based off of that one way of thinking is you get industries built off of exploitation of other humans, exploitation of the earth, of the oceans, um, and and then normalizing that kind of harm, whether that be the harm that Jolene's talking about, the harm against women's bodies, the harm that's caused by gender-based violence, whether it be the harm that's against queer folks or against Black folks and other melanated peoples. Um, all of that is what justifies the extraction of oil and other resources from the earth, because people stop being able to see that we are everything around us, that we are the earth, we are the water, and that there is a natural order. There's a natural order, and there are laws of the universe which include reciprocity, which include generosity, love. And we know this as indigenous peoples, right? We know this deep in our bones. We know this through our practices. We know this through our songs. Um, and just as Lungi is talking about, the systems that are currently in place have been set up to silence us and to separate us from who we are, and to confuse us into believing that we're not powerful, and to confuse us into believing that we don't have the capacity to transform everything around us, to confuse us to stop believing what our ancestors knew, which is that we are in communion with everything, and that our songs and our prayers have the capacity to transform our understanding, to transform each other, to heal harm, and to stop looking at the power that's within us, which is actually within all of life itself. And so what's going to happen in a moment where indigenous peoples all over the world tap back into the kanna, to the life force that's inside of ourselves, and we bring that forward unashamed of who we are. We bring that forward knowing that this is the voice of the ancestors, which is the voice of the earth itself. That's going to have the capacity to transform everything around us, to transform the conditions in which we live, the ways in which we see each other, how we treat each other, how we value the healing of one another and care for each other. And I'm really excited about that moment. I feel so hopeful because of the good work that all of our people all over the world are doing.
Yeah.
It is about a philosophy and a way of being that is true to who we are, and is in everything that we see. I see equity as a naturally occurring phenomena, right? It is living inside of the earth. The earth knows how to balance itself, right? And it's just tuning back into that, and creating spaces for our people and for all people to tune back into that is going to allow for the transformation to come.
Yeah, and then I also think about it in terms of indigeneity is about and equity is that for too long trans people, Mahus, Vaxalelawers, the Fafafine, the ladies, who are culturally, who are cultural custodians, traditional custodians, in terms of how knowledge and how we practice that are shared within our different traditional forms, and you said it wonderfully. Systems of power and equity is really the problem. And so how do we talk about systems? And I just thought about one of Audre Lorde's quote was like, you can't dismantle what was it saying? You can't dismantle the house, the house, with using the same tool that he build his house with. So we have to use different ways of dismantling systems and forms of colonialization, patriarchy, and misogyny in terms of how do we move forward. And Mama Jolene, in terms of equity and the work around climate change, you know, we as marginalized community have always been left out in terms of this conversation on climate change because it doesn't affect us. But we really are a part of this. And one of the research that was done in Fiji was the Down by the River, and which Langi talked about is also about bringing the realities of the most marginalized community at the time of a cyclone that hit Fiji, was to really see how our communities were affected by a cyclone, and what it is for for communities, for ladies in Tonga, in terms of how do we address equity.
Well, every time this question comes in, especially equity and justice,
Don't cringe.
a question is always, this question always comes up, like, what is environmental equity and justice? Okay, when Cyclone Gita happened, and all our a majority of our trans community that went to the evacuation centers were not accepted into the evacuation center because of their gender. Okay, so that is one thing that we had to work on, because if the environmental equity is a basic human right, and environmental justice is the act of protecting that right, and justice involves in actions and activism necessary to highlight the inequities of and level that playing by in the field, and especially with human rights activists that are on the field that tries to deal with issues like this after the disaster. So what we had to do was we actually had to try and create an environment that is more friendlier for our community. So when the eruption happened in January, they had no, it was automatically, they thought, okay, we're going to where to this place. We're not going to any of the so-called normal evacuation centers that everybody goes to, So unfortunately, it happened to be my home that they all came to, and for 3 days, you see all these trans and LGBT people, around, and the neighbors were thinking they were having a big party right after the evacuation, the volcano eruption. But that's the kind of environment that we created, so that everybody doesn't, or they already know where to go, and luckily, whoever that husband of mine built the house was big enough to bring the family in. I just hope that we'll find another one soon.
Find it soon. Find it soon.
But it's it's really important that we need to know the environmental equity, the importance of environmental equity. Because like Langi and everybody has already said, equity means acknowledging the disproportionate impacts from climate change. Okay, but at the same time, we need to be, basically, we need to study the environmental equity, and to know that equity is a human right. We say trans right is human right, but we need to know that environmental equity is also human right. And when we talk about intersectionality, we talk about working with every single person without leaving anyone behind.
Yeah.
Whether you look like Dorothy Lamour or Clint Eastwood, the younger version of it, you're still part of the family. You're no different from anybody.
Yeah, and also like we need to raise, very critical issues, now at the global level. The Millennium Development Goals changed after the progressive work, not so progressive, and now they named it the Sustainable Development Goal. But after years, now it's become a global goal. So to us, it's a worry when you come from the Pacific Island countries that 2030 is just around the corner. It's just somewhere around here. And come to that is that when the review of this global goal comes to an end, to me is the worry is that where do our communities find home? Kiribati is sinking. Tuvalu is literally drowning. Communities in Fiji are relocating. Tonga is still surviving and being resilient, and these are issues that are pertinent to us in the Pacific region. Is that you all have shared that we do so little, but we face the brunt of what bigger countries are doing. And Langi, like I want to bring back this question and really say that global north and global south, and how do we work together in terms of addressing this issue. So for us is how can Utopia Washington, those us, increase the solidarity with your climate justice movement, in a geographic stand, the Pacific Island, Turtle Islands, or place of refuge. How do we really bring about solidarity, such a favorite word of mine, and solidarity is such a big word, but what does it mean for us, and how do we engage? What are entry points in terms of how Utopia can create that and increase, solidarity within the climate justice movement? Anyone, we can start with, what do you think?
Can I quickly respond just to the point from the last discussion around human rights? And one of the, it is a frustration actually for civil society groups and human rights defenders, women rights defenders, is that the attention that should be given to, a human right within the formal climate negotiations, the global climate policy forums is not given that that urgent attention that it should be given, because we are talking about women, of children, of people, persons of diverse socioeconomic, of indigenous communities, their rights being violated, being infringed, being what do you call these? Being abused by authorities, by extraterritorial companies, because of that growing interest to steal dig up more coal,
Mm.
pump some more fossil fuels out of the ground. And then, we have this conversation about deep sea mining that's happening in the Pacific, which, many of the Pacific Island countries are starting to stand against. But circling back to the human rights conversation, we there's been some progress. The Human Rights Council established a new special rapporteur on the protection and promotion of human rights in the context of climate change. There's the CSW 66 that's happened this year for the first time, had climate change as a key theme. But also, I just wanted to draw attention to this growing movement of civil society that are putting their weight behind a campaign that's being led by the Vanuatu government. And I think, as Pacific Islanders, we should really push our weight behind Vanuatu's seek through a resolution, an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the obligation of states with respect to the rights of current and future generations. While the political processes must, and the multilateral process must continue, I think this is another avenue for Pacific Islanders to seek redress, to seek clarity between human rights law and climate change law, and cement the consensus on climate science that the IPCC had recently, just early this year, released 2 reports, and it's detrimental, it's damning for the Pacific. And I think, and I certainly believe, pursuing these other causes, this other alternative cause, to seek that advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice can prompt governments and corporations to act to increase their climate ambition. Because here in the Pacific, every single fraction of the degree, every single molecule from every carbon emission matters, because it's life and death for the Pacific.
Mm. Thank you. And I think because Langi can also like frame it around, back to the question around how do we build solidarity within the movement of climate change in the Pacific, but also for those of us here at the diaspora, in terms of how do we engage and how do we look for entry points in terms of continuing this amazing work, and what does solidarity look like in terms of engagement?
I think that I think what I would say about this is that, speaking about our Indigenous lifeways and our Indigenous knowledge, relationship building is really at the heart of who we are as Indigenous peoples, whether that's building and maintaining our relationships to the places that we call home or to each other. And we're in a moment right now where it's true that the climate crisis is affecting everybody on the planet. And it's affecting some of us in deeper and more present ways currently than others. For those of us who are outside of our ancestral homelands, I think that we need to be very careful not to become settlers on other Indigenous people's lands. And we need to look towards our ancestors' ways to guide us towards what it means to make and be in right relation with the lands that we call home. I think for those of us here in Turtle Island, it also means reckoning with the history of inequity here. And it means connecting and building relationships with Indigenous peoples of the lands that we call home. And I think it also means building and maintaining relationships to the Black communities that are in the places that we call home and have been here on this continent since their ancestors became survivors of human trafficking and enslavement. And if we understand that these systems of oppression are really at the root of the climate crisis, and also that our people, Black people, and all non-Black Indigenous peoples around the world have the solutions and have the power to get us out of this moment, then we start to take really seriously what it means for the future, for us to be connected to each other, because we're going to need places to stay. We're going to need to be staying in those places in ways that are sustainable, right? And that means treating each other with love and respect. That means making things good for everybody. And I wanted to speak to the piece that Jolene was speaking about in terms of, how the inequities that currently exist get exacerbated in these crises, and kind of connect that to this piece that I was sharing earlier, which is, the piece about transphobia and and sexism, transmisogyny, is that, to me, those are at the root of those oppressions are still it's still the same root. People believing that some lives are not valuable and others are. Which is to say that people have confused our relationship with nature, right? When we think about, you were talking earlier about trans folks, being transmitters of ancestral knowledge, and that's if we look to nature, we see that the way that Americans, the way that the oppressive society thinks about gender and sexuality is really different than the way that that other beings in nature think about gender, right? Seahorses, the males are the ones that get pregnant and give birth, right? Or at least the males, the way that we think about it. So I think that these are the types of wisdoms that come from our people, that come from our people's deep relationship to who we are. And I think that the more we bring that out and we bring that into the conversation with people, the more that we bring our embodied ways of being. There's this beautiful dance that you had during the break, right? That is a knowledge and an intelligence about what it means to be in this body, to understand the body as sacred. And if I understand that my body is sacred, I understand that your body is sacred, right? That your body's meant to be treated as a temple the same way that mine is, the same as the earth beneath my feet, the same as the house that I walk into. So I think that that's the possibility that we have, is to treat each other well, to live in a good way, and to build relationships that can last for generations. I want to be so close to the people that I'm building a home with, that in 3 generations from now, their kids' kids are going to say, I knew your grandparents' brother's sister, and that's why you're allowed to come over here and pick taro off my land, or whatever, right? I think that is a beautiful, beautiful way to be, and it's something that we've always known, and something that is really gonna advance our ability to live on this planet, to continue to live in that way.
Thank you. Iwane, few words of what comes into your mind in terms of how can Utopia Washington increase solidarity within the work on climate justice, within the movement.
One issue that I know is awareness. And even though you see climate change here and there, you see it on TV, but people still don't feel or acknowledge the importance of climate change and how it affects our very survival. It's not until you search for climate change on YouTube that you see videos of Tuvalu and whatnot. But what's funny is that we can watch these videos and not feel anything about it, because the way our minds work now, we think about ourselves, and it's like, oh, it's affecting them, it's not going to affect me. And that's the kind of mentality that needs to change. And I believe that we should act in a prudent manner. Think about the future and think about how our actions today will affect the future. And it's very important that we do awareness campaigns. We talk to the young people. We continue to instill this importance of climate change in the minds of our young people, because they're going to be the future. But not only the young people, but also the adults, because the adults are the ones that are in the legislature, the ones that are making the policies and all of that. And here in American Samoa, we have these initiatives, and it's not until recently that we have created a task force that are coming together and putting together initiatives and work that we can do from the territorial level to help combat the problem of climate change. And it's very important that Utopia as well will work on this awareness campaign and awareness program to bring this message forward and to pound it and continue knocking on people's doors, continue knocking on our Pacific Islanders and ensuring that we make this a priority, make climate change a priority, and know that it's important because our existence and survival depends on it. Thank you.
Jolene?
Yeah. Thank you, Amatai. I was just going to go into it. And it's funny that you say that, Ioane, but because I was just thinking, one of the things that Utopia can do is reach out to the US leaders. You reach out to the US leaders. Unfortunately, the man that didn't believe in climate change and global warming is not in the office anymore. Hello. And if you're a Trump believer, thank you. Bless your heart. But he is the one that's making us think. Okay? He's the one that is getting people to come and dig out our oceans. Hello. We have treasures, yes, but it's opening up volcanic. We are sitting on a disc of fire. Us in Tonga, we've got about how many volcanic, whatever they have there. And if we, it might bring good future for our next generation, but hello, it's gonna make Tonga disappear. Yeah.
And we don't want that to happen. We don't want
No. We don't want this flower to disappear. And not only that, we need to reach out to all our leaders. We need to reach out to, Utopia can reach out to all the leaders of your representatives of your states and the leaders of your in the capital, to talk about the reality of what Dale was mentioned before, because what they need to understand is that climate change is really ruining us in the Pacific. What you do in the big country is really ruining us. And if you expect us to, if the US turned around and said, okay, since you're sinking Tonga, we'll give you a piece of land to come there. Okay, we come there and we suffer from all the fog and whatever rubbish that's, even though America's the land of the whatever, free and everything, but your climate is ruining people's lives. Hello, but at the same time, we have to become the activists. You talk to your leaders, we talk to our leaders. Why is it that we're starting to have more Chinese in our country? Even though they do help with our economy, with helping out with funding all these big buildings. Hello, those buildings stands there for how many months, and then when the next cyclone comes, it takes away the roof. So that's how cheaply it was done. Because, they give the money and everything. I don't know what happens, but it's just not me. But they're I'm not being racist. I love Chinese people, but they should be controlled because they've literally taking over the lands. They bring in the business, they help out with a lot of things, but it's making us, our own people, lazy. They sit and eat, and that's why they get all these stupid diseases, because unforsaken diseases, diabetes and everything. Our forefathers ate all those organic pigs and roast pigs and everything, and they lived until 90 something. And now all these new things that comes in straight into our, for our generation, and then we become big and sick. So it should tell us that something must be wrong somewhere, that we're not following what our forefathers started. We're adapting to the new things, new images, new food, new kind of dietary and everything is processed that you buy from the shop.
And I think it really goes back to the valuable points that Levitt Nalangi and Dakota shared about the importance of sharing traditional knowledge and how that looks like within our different contexts of the Pacific region. And it brings me to the last round of our Talanoa, and it's really about it's Earth Day, and the theme of Earth Day is around invest in our planet. And again, we need to invest in terms of survival of our planet. So, the healthier our ecosystem are, the healthier the planet, and the healthier we are as people who live on this planet. And so for me is, however we're being silenced with growing need of power, as climate equity is disproportionate, and you've all said it. How can we accomplish, power to be heard and the power to be revived? How do we do that? And how do we understand each other?
Well, we use. I mean, for me, the way we do activism work back at home, we do the Talanoa methodology. We reach out to our leaders. We sit down with them. We don't believe in rallies. We don't believe in shouting, making too much noise, because they'll just keep closing their ears, And the next thing that will come out of it, riot, killing, ruining people's lives, We need to reach out to our leaders and sit down and talk to them. And if they keep on saying, yes, they'll do it, but they haven't done it for the next, and then the next leader, the next government will come, we keep talking. Until it comes to a time that we cannot put on any of our lipstick and makeup, then we give it to the next generation to continue. But the Talanoa shouldn't stop, Bring them. We sit down with the church leaders, with our church leaders, especially our church leaders. They are influential people, They can talk to them. They can start praying for our government to understand what we are suffering, instead of praying to marginalize us. They should be, praying because when it comes to disasters, some of these church people turn around and say, the cause of Cyclone Gita, the cause of the volcanic explosion is your sin. You people, But no, it wasn't. You need to sit down with those people and talk clearly, straightforward. A conversation, that's right, a good, loving conversation should be done in a Talanoa that everybody listens, everybody's able to speak their heart, and it comes from real experience. Don't use anybody else. Don't use New Zealand's experience. Don't use America's experience. Use your experience and talk to them. And I'm sure after a few conversations, they will understand what you're saying.
And I guess, Langi, how the whole concept of Talanoa came about at COP26 when Fiji became the president of COP. Part of it was also kind of dismantling that power and authority within how climate negotiation looked like at COP23. And, the whole concept of the Talanoa methodology was to bring people to a certain level where we're able to speak to each other and understand each other, and to bring about how do we kind of negotiate power and privilege in terms of how we negotiate people and the planet, and how do we in terms of how do we live within this planet. And a lot of conversations about power. Power is such a beautiful word. Everyone wants power, but we need to address the root causes of that. But have equity as climate equity in terms of how we have this conversation around power. And Lange, what is it for you? Also along with the theme of this year's Earth Day is invest in our planet.
Thank you, Amasai, and thank you for to the earlier responses. I want to reference what Dakota said about relationship building, and I think that's really an integral part of ensuring equity, building a sense of community, and in that we weave in this intentionality about how we work, the intention that we must move into these spaces, create these safe spaces where communities are able to converse, are able to one another, mutual respect and reverence for each other, respecting the diverse bodies of knowledge, that not only the consultants, the experts, also have experts rooted, in some of the communities. Ensuring that our, approaches are context appropriate, are context sensitive, and you only will be able to get that if you, excuse me, if you are speaking, if you are involving as equal partners the communities, the youth, the women and girls, people with disabilities, the elderly, persons of diverse sexual orientation and gender identities and expression. So that's sort of like that, weaving in that those approaches into relationship building can bring about equity. And then if we look at things, for instance, climate finance, which is one of the biggest, continues to be one of the Pacific's political and policy ask at every COP is increase climate finance for vulnerable frontline communities, increase climate finance for global South countries, transferring that wealth that's been concentrated on the global North to the global South. And, this wealth have been stripped in many years, many centuries ago, from the backs of our labors, from the back of our people and our resources. And so these, for instance, this climate finance are not even trickling down to the communities where it should be used. We still continue to hear communities whose projects have been approved, there were funding approved, but nothing has happened. Nothing has happened in terms of building a seawall or reclaiming land, etc. And we lose most of this finance in the bureaucracy, the parachute consultants that flies out. And so looking at some of the kind of transformative, scalable, indigenous solutions, I think there's great potential to support these, to scale these, and to demonstrate to the world Pacific leadership in combating the climate crisis. And so when we talk about equity, we are talking about who's actually sitting on the boards of these multilateral organizations, who's sitting in these, even at CSO, in philanthropies. Do they represent indigenous people? Do they represent people of diverse OGS? Do they represent youth? Do they represent women? We need diverse groups of people in these in these boards of philanthropies, of donor organizations, to ensure that the processes works for the community. We have many groups who are not registered, who are not, formal legally registered for many reasons, for many challenges, um, uh, and they've demonstrated some really transformative, scalable solutions and initiatives. And the funds are not able to get to them because they do not meet the requirements. And I think there's opportunities. There's always that potential to build the systems and processes to meet the specific needs and the context of these communities, especially the climate frontline um, communities that are seeking funds and finance to resource and to support some of their work. Now, on some of the work going forward for the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, CAN International as a whole is involved in this whole process of decolonizing from the inside, ensuring that our global team is representative of the constituents, equal representation between the global south and the global north, um, within the secretariat, within the administrative, so that we have people who understand the kind of challenges that some of these regional nodes and national nodes say problem around visa because we come from the Pacific, but you understand that the Pacific has an issue for many years about accessibility to COP meetings, about accessibility to some of the global policy, climate policy forums, etc. Um, and then, so that's the whole decoloniality work that's happening within CAN. But here in the Pacific, we are now reaching out and bringing on board within PCAN some of the groups that represent, the Pacific Disability Forum, the Pacific Conference of Churches, the Moral Voice for many Pacific Island community and churches. We're bringing in youth groups and indigenous groups, and we're providing platforms to them to say, here's a platform that PCAN is going to provide, where we're going to bring in some of the key state and non-state actors, and feel free to articulate your policy demands to them. And so we work with our national nodes, and this is an ongoing process, but it's a journey that is necessary if we have to ensure that we're really grounding ourselves on climate equity.
Thank you. Thank you, Langi, for sharing, very important and critical things to keep in mind in terms of how we're moving forward as Pacific Island people who are organizing community at the national level, regional, but also very important at the global space, in terms of addressing the lived realities and experiences of our community and people who continue to navigate every day in terms of the challenges that we face as Pacific Island people, home and also here, those of us at the diaspora. And I want to thank you all for being part of this Talanoa session, and you all shared very, very, very important um, highlights and issues around how to address this work. And thank you very much for your very artistic work. And I just have an announcement. So tomorrow is Earth Day at Utopia, and we are celebrating, and we're hosting a cleanup hike followed by a picnic and wellness activities. So if you're around Washington, in Seattle, here in Kent, we're hosting this Earth Day event. And you better be here, if you tuned in. And it's at 10 p.m. tomorrow. The cleanup is held at the Great Grand Sus Creek Trail and it's followed by a community picnic at the Kent Memorial Park. And without further ado, on behalf of Utopia Washington and everyone else, we want to say thank you very much to our viewers for tuning in, for learning, and for engaging. And we also look forward to creating movements and creating you know warriors of climate justice within this conversation. And the Talanoa meaning that it does not only end here, it's a continuous conversation in terms of how we all can be ambitious in terms of saving this planet. We are at the crossroad and it's time for action, and it's also time to secure a livable future. And thank you again to our viewers, and thank you very much to our panelists. Vinaka Vakalevu Favitailava.
Vinaka, thank you.